All right, welcome to the plenary session of the 7th Annual Jersey Waterworks Conference. My name is Dan Kennedy. I serve as a member of the steering committee, and I've done so since the inception of this collaborative. Also co-chair the Asset Management and Finance Group. My day-to-day job is I'm Senior Director with the Utility and Transportation Contractors Association. Our members deliver on a lot of the promise here on infrastructure funding in coordination and consultation with our partners in the trades, who are really a big part of the success story here. So my job here today is to give you an idea of what we're going to be up to in the next hour and a half. The title of the session is When Significant Funding is Finally Available for Capital Investment in Water, Will It Be Accessible to All? The Backbone staff had the foresight to recommend this and foreshadowed some of the good news we've heard in the last month about federal infrastructure funding. There's also some opportunities with the Recovery Act funding around water infrastructure that you'll hear about today as well. So let's get started. I do want to note that at the end of this session, please check the chat before for the Jersey Waterworks Check Scavenger Hunt game question. The first 3 correct entries will receive $25 gift certificates to Starbucks. So be on the lookout for that question towards the end. And really just so the crowd and so the panelists have some idea, we're going to launch of what folks are interested in. We're going to launch a poll that you'll be able to see and respond to. And please respond as soon as you see that. In regards about what are the infrastructure challenges that you'd like to see addressed. So Andrea or staff, if that's launched, I'm just going to let that play out for a little bit, and we'll go back to the results in a minute. A little background on the session. Money in the bank, in the federal government, and money going to the state in of itself doesn't solve our infrastructure challenges. Just spending money on shovel-ready projects is not anyone's idea of success here. On the flip side, the entire congressional delegation in the state of New Jersey voted in favor of the infrastructure bill. Our governor supported it. Our president supported it. The entire cabinet supported it. And folks are out on a limb, and the voters and ratepayers and taxpayers of this country are going to expect that some of these long-standing problems that we face in our communities are solved. So on this panel, you're going to hear a nice balance of opinions. You're going to hear some background in terms of what the federal funding means. I'm going to cede some of the time I was planning to give a background on the funding to our friend Zach McHugh from Senator Booker's office.
Yes, I turned it all the way up.
I think we got a little background here.
I don't have any speakers.
Chris, we're hearing you.
Oh, I could try using headphones.
All right. Let me see. Can we mute Chris?
Oh, yeah, this picture of me is so gross. Okay. To get a more normal one.
Well, this is fun. All right, here we go. So let's just roll through this. What we're going to do today is each panelist is going to have a couple minutes to give some information and frame out their perspective on the topic. Then we're going to go back through and ask some questions that have been kind of preordained here. And then we're going to open it up to questions that you pose in the chat box. So you can start queuing up any questions you have in the chat box, and we will certainly get to them. And let's see, do we have a report on the survey? We have 102 responses. Looks like that of those responses, educating officials and decision makers about investing in water was the top one, and number 2 would be financing long-term control plans. So like I said, a balance of education, community interest, and also, frankly, let's get to work and fund and get these projects going. So I think that's the dichotomy that we're all facing, is the need to get this right and the need to get it done right now, so we solve these problems. So First up, I'd like to just run through our speakers. Zach McHugh, Deputy State Director from the Office of the U.S. Senator Booker. Katie Hansen, Senior Advisor with the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. Kareem Adim, my friend Kareem up in Newark, Director of the Department of Water and Sewer Utilities. And Nicole Miller, who you've heard from earlier in the day already, and we're looking forward to hearing her comments later on. But first, Zach, you're up.
Thanks, Dan. And hi, everybody, and good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this panel. As mentioned, I'm Senator Cory Booker's Deputy State Director. I'm based out of Newark, New Jersey, and for almost 8 years now, I've had the opportunity to work on environmental issues, infrastructure issues, and energy issues for Senator Booker. And with that time comes an interesting last 8 years on the topic of water, the need to fund water infrastructure, the federal government's role, and ultimately how important it is to a state like New Jersey. My goal today is going to be to give an overview on federal resources within the past few months that have come from legislation that will go to states and ultimately municipalities. I know there's a focus on how we're ensuring resources are getting to communities that need it most. And there's a lot of different ways to describe those communities: disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities. But ultimately our goal is going to be making sure there's attention paid on the disproportionate need in those communities. And I think New Jersey is uniquely situated for our water infrastructure needs, with a significant amount of municipalities that need to address CSOs, a lot of other issues. So as most of you know, the large chunk of federal resources that go to states are through the State Revolving Fund, the Clean Water and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act did provide a good chunk of supplemental appropriations to each of those programs, in addition to a bunch of other funding. But ultimately, there are a lot of estimates of what our national infrastructure needs are in terms of water infrastructure. The EPA estimates that capital costs of wastewater and drinking water infrastructure needed to really get our systems to meet federal water quality standards and public health standards at $744 billion over a 20-year period. So there are many in Congress who have been fighting for many years on the need to have large dollar amounts invested in infrastructure and water infrastructure in particular. We're starting to crack away at that, but the need is overwhelming. Before I talk about IIJA, and I think Dan alluded to it, there are resources in other places where localities and states can try to be creative in using federal resources for water infrastructure. In fact, the American Rescue Plan that was passed in March provided, as many know, $350 billion in grants to states and localities for COVID-related expenses. And ultimately, a lot of that is at the state's discretion under the guidance of the Treasury Department. Treasury's final guidance did say that eligible water infrastructure projects that meet eligibility requirements through the existing SRF programs are eligible uses of that funding. And so those resources need to go a lot of places, but it is a potential option. I think the need for COVID resources is also overwhelming. New Jersey got around $6.24 billion of that funding from the state funding national pot, but and there's a lot of need, but there are potential uses there. With the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the top line is around 48 and change billion over the next 5 years. So the bill allocates funding over the next 5 years. And as I mentioned, both the Drinking Water SRF and the Clean Water SRF received $11.713 billion over the next 5 years. It's going to go up every fiscal year. FY22 is 1.9. By FY25 and 26, it's 2.6 billion annually. There are some changes in FY22 and 23, so the next two fiscal years. The previous match of a 20% state match of those funding is going to be lowered to 10%. So there's a little bit more flexibility there. And we know that as a result of the IIJA, or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, almost half, 49% of that must be used as grants or full principal forgiveness. I think the question here is, how are we making more access, providing more access to municipalities? And some of those tweaks, percentages of what's going to go out as a loan or principal forgiveness, and where those funds are directed in terms of to what types of localities, can really make a difference for some of these projects in the SRF pipeline. This is, as I mentioned, a supplemental appropriation. So these programs are allocated or appropriated every year. For the last few fiscal years, for example, it's been about $1.1 billion to the drinking water, around 1.6 to clean water. This is nearly 6 times that amount. So, with this infusion, you're looking at around $6.14 billion annually. And those are going to continue even on top of this supplemental appropriation every fiscal year. The expectation is there would be a continued allocation. So it really is a good chunk of change to those programs, which we know are very highly prescribed in New Jersey. In addition to those, the bill actually also provided an additional $15 billion to be appropriated through the drinking water SRF specific to lead service line replacement and related activities. That's identifying where we're going with the planning design. It's $3 billion over a year for 5 years. And again, almost half, 49%, must be awarded to states as 100% principal forgiveness of grants. There's no state match required. And so this is one where you're seeing $15 billion in the drinking water SRF. Almost half needs to be provided at 100% grant or forgivable loan. There's also additional funding for states and the SRF program to identify and address emerging contaminants. So there's a big focus on PFAS, $1 billion in the clean water SRF, 100% principal forgiveness or grants, and then another $4 billion in the drinking water SRF for emerging contaminants, again with a focus on PFAS. The bill also provides more funding to an existing program authorized by the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Small and Disadvantaged Community Grant Program. So this is a program that's appropriated every year. In FY21, the annual appropriations was $26 million. This is, again, it's a formula funding to the states, 45% state match. The IIJA provided an additional $5 billion to help small and disadvantaged communities. And again, things like addressing emerging contaminants. And there were some tweaks to the program which would allow funding to use for filters, filtration systems, et cetera. And then, one other thing I want to mention on IIJA, it's on appropriations, it's not funded, but it does authorize something that, should really be discussed. And a lot of people are really recognizing the need for significant investment in resiliency for our water infrastructure existing systems, right? We need to upgrade and update and bring everything up to federal standards, but we also need to be preparing for extreme weather. And so this bill authorizes a climate resilience program at $25 million a year for the EPA to establish what's going to be called the Drinking Water System Infrastructure Resilience and Sustainability Program. So this is for small and disadvantaged public water systems and mid-sized public water systems to fund projects that basically protect our existing infrastructure from storm, weather hazards, extreme weather, and things like cybersecurity as well. So no money yet. It's an authorization, but it's a step in the right direction. The rub here is how much does New Jersey get? I think everybody saw last week there was a good announcement from the EPA in the state of New Jersey that as a result of this bill, this year's allocation will be $168.9 million for FY22. And I'm not entirely clear on the entire breakdown of each where those programs are going, but ultimately it's a good number. And knowing that these programs are going to be increasing annually until FY 25 and 6, we can expect more in the coming years. So that's the bill that's passed Congress and was signed into law. The talk of the day is the House passed Build Back Better infrastructure bill, which I can give a top line sort of update on. $9 billion in funding for lead remediation. This is to 3 existing programs, 2 of which were authorized in the Safe Drinking Water Act. Again, one addresses lead filtration in schools and childcare. $970 million to replace lead service lines in rural communities. We've seen $225 million for low-income households that pay a significant proportion of their household income for utilities. That's to assist them to pay their things like water utilities. Another $500 million to EPA for stormwater reuse and sewer overflow programs that exist already. And sort of the latest in the Senate is, it's possible that bill will look different, likely that the bill will look different than what was passed out of the House. By how much and to those specific programs, it's just, it's unclear. But the Senate sort of has said, the Senate leadership has said their goal is to try and get a bill done before the Christmas break, before the calendar year, and we'll see if that plays out. Ultimately, I think, as folks remember, this is going to be a bill that's passed in the reconciliation process. So right now, there's ongoing negotiations about what the Senate bill will look like, in addition to conversations with the Senate parliamentarian about how it's structured and the language around it that will allow it to pass through the reconciliation process, which, again, as those who might recall, we used earlier in this year to pass COVID relief, is sort of this somewhat lengthy process on the Senate floor where you're entertaining a lot of amendments and hopefully getting to the finish line in a timely manner. But it's one of those things the Senate, my colleagues in our Washington office call the vote-a-rama, and they're up all night sort of making vote recommendations. So that's where the latest stands there. I want to just take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Senator Booker's work in water infrastructure. Briefly, we've had an opportunity to look at really creative ways to address the need to invest in water infrastructure, but also assist the industry writ large. And I think, as folks may recall, we sort of had this bill on water transfer, which allowed states at one time for 1 year to be able to transfer up to $100 million from their clean water SRF to their drinking water SRF to address sort of emergency or immediate needs for lead service line replacement. And we do know that New Jersey was able to take advantage of some of that, and communities in New Jersey were able to reap the benefits or will be as their projects come through the pipeline. Ultimately, in a Republican-controlled Senate and with a Republican president, we were able to get that bill passed and done, and it was one of the sort of prouder, quieter moments of a small victory, where you hope that the Senate can work the best way, and that might be an example of it. But the one bill I really want to point to, I think, because we really are talking a lot about equity in investment, is a bill that Senator Booker's introduced in 2 Congresses and just reintroduced this past summer, the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act. So this is a bill which is tailored to, really written to put a high dollar amount of funding at what we see, what Senator Booker sees as a really big issue with environmental justice, which is legacy pollution. So, this is really, when it was first introduced, putting a lot of money into the Superfund program, right? If Black and Hispanic Americans, 1 in 4 are living within 3 miles of a Superfund site. I think those numbers are higher in New Jersey, where we're the largest state, 116 or 17 Superfund sites. The bill provides $30 billion to reduce air emissions, particulate matter from diesel vehicles, incentivizes zero emission vehicles, and throws a lot of money at abandoned mines and former military cleanup sites and things like that. When we reintroduced the bill this year, we added a section on water infrastructure. Your friend and mine, Andy Cricken, and Tim Dillingham from ALS kind of came to us with this striking statistic that of the 330 miles of the Delaware River, every mile has water quality that's acceptable for primary recreational contact, except for the 27-mile stretch that runs by Philadelphia, Camden City, Chester, and Wilmington, Delaware. And so when we're talking about CSOs, and we look at the municipalities in New Jersey that are subject and are burdened with the need to really have a chunk of investment in addressing those CSOs, it's an environmental justice issue as well. So we added a section on water infrastructure this summer where we were a bit more ambitious than what was able to pass through Congress, but it's $45 billion to replace every single lead service line in the country. That was our estimate, and that was our benchmark. And in addition, we added $25 billion for EPA to direct grants directly to municipalities or municipal entities for CSO systems. And as we're talking about how we're using federal resources and tailoring federal resources to disadvantaged communities, we required that funding go to municipalities in which the median household income was $50,000 or less. We did a sort of evaluation of where that was going to get to, and it's probably not a surprise that a lot of those CSO communities meet that requirement. But ultimately, it was important for us to identify that as an environmental justice issue. And have checks in there to make sure that this just isn't a resource that can go anywhere, that we need to be focusing on environmental justice communities. We've done other things in the water space. We've looked at bundling the WIFIA program. WIFIA, as I think everybody knows, is a federal financing, long-term, low interest rate financing opportunity for water infrastructure. It's a loan. But we've also looked at the needs of, the water utility workforce and an aging out workforce, and trying to find innovative programs to help bring folks to good paying jobs in the industry. And so I think there's still a lot to be done. The IIJA and ultimately what we hope will be a really good Build Back Better bill in the Senate are really very significant, if not historic, examples of investment in water infrastructure. I'm a little bit I want to address the poll answer, right? I saw those potential questions and I said to myself, I know that most responders are going to say, they want the priority should be convincing elected officials to invest in it. I think many elected officials, and I can speak for the one I work for, who came as a former mayor of the state's largest city. Certainly, with that kind of perspective, it's impossible to ignore the need. And when you're throwing dollar amounts out, like I started with $744 billion over 20 years, it seems to almost be a number that's almost insurmountable. But ultimately, we can't ignore it. We have to, in New Jersey, address it. Recent storm events show us that places are flooding that never have before. And unless we take action to really invest, we're really going to bear the consequences. And so on the stormwater side, on the drinking water side, I think these are all steps in the right direction, but it's clear to most that a lot more needs to be done.
Great stuff. I'm getting goosed here a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. That was done. Thank you.
And we got lots of questions, and we all owe you and the team there and the senator a debt of gratitude for his leadership that stands above most others. Our entire delegation in the state of New Jersey supported we call it the BIF, the bipartisan infrastructure framework. It branded something through the House and the Senate, but so please, on behalf of Jersey Waterworks, please express our deep appreciation for his leadership. I think my organization has sent some kind of personal thank yous, but we as a group thank him and his team. And I'm going to move on next to Katie. Katie's going to give us a high-level view of federal SRF funding and how it's kind of working, and also some state-specific information about New Jersey. And we all know that New Jersey runs one of the best, if not the best, SRF programs in the country. That's credit to the DEP and the Infrastructure Bank. But even great programs can want to become and can become greater. And perhaps there's some thoughts that we can spark from Katie's conversation here. So Katie, have at it.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me and see my slides? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to thank Dan and Jersey Waterworks for the invitation. It's a real honor to be on this esteemed panel. And as Dan said, I, like many of us, am such a big fan of the State Revolving Fund program and the amazing work that's being done in New Jersey, and have done some analyses on how states allocate these funds, which are important because they are the largest source of funding. Zach just ran through some other options that include community block grants and WIFIA and USDA funds, but the state revolving funds are this big source of capital and important to look, therefore, on how they're allocated. And today I'll just give a really quick overview of where states and communities are making decisions about accessing these funds and allocating the funds, and then talk about which communities have received the funds in New Jersey, which types of awards are provided, and which types of projects are funded and financed through this program. So I'll dive in here with the process to allocate state revolving funds. This is a simplified schematic, but in general, states in New Jersey sets the eligibility criteria for which types of borrowers can apply to receive these funds and solicit applications in various ways. Then the potential borrowers, these are communities, water systems, wastewater utilities, will complete the application process, which includes the project designs and also some financial information, some environmental reviews. Those applications go to the state, and then the state will rank the project applications and decide where to commit funds. The borrowers then construct the project, or if they received a pre-development loan, they'll do the work of developing the project and then submit receipts and be reimbursed for their expenses. And so just walk through some decision points here. The states are really defining and prioritizing what are called in the drinking water side, the disadvantaged communities, or on the clean water side, some affordability criteria, which at the point of eligibility criteria and which types of awards are funded and financed helps tip the scales to low resource places or historically burdened places. The state also determines which type of assistance to provide. So most of the program is provided as loans, but sometimes grants are offered, or what's called in SRF land, the principal forgiveness loans. And then states determine which types of projects to support. And on the public side, the public has an opportunity to comment once the proposed list of projects is out on that ranking, and has work to do in working with the state on deciding which types of projects and communities should receive these funds. Right, so looking at the data, what we see is nationally, 7% of water systems have received drinking water state revolving funds in the past 10 years. And in New Jersey, that's 9%. Some of those systems provide large or serve very large populations, and therefore more than 9% of New Jersey residents have benefited from the program, but the systems are going down to about 10% of systems in the last decade. And so one opportunity to tweak this program is to try to recruit more systems to apply for these funds and then receive awards. In terms of the type of assistance that drinking water state revolving funds have provided in the past decade, We see that in New Jersey, about 10% of the total binding commitments or total awards have been provided as what is called additional subsidy or grants, principal forgiveness, negative interest loans. That's right at the national average. So some states have provided more grants and loan forgiveness, and some states have provided less. And another way to sort of tweak this program to enhance equity is to provide more assistance as a grant or additional subsidy. And the infrastructure bill, as Zach outlined, raises the floor on how many of these funds will go out as a grant that doesn't need to be repaid as opposed to a loan. And so then we looked at which communities are receiving SRFs. And what we found is large communities are more likely to receive SRFs, and communities that have a higher proportion of people who identify as non-Hispanic white are slightly more likely to receive SRFs. What I want to dig in here is on the resources within the communities that have received a drinking water award in the last decade. And what you see in the scattered plot is the median household income along the x-axis, which really indicates how many resources within the community are there to repay the loan. And then the percent of residents who are living below twice the federal poverty line on the y-axis. And from a policy perspective, we can quadrant this and think about which types of systems and populations should receive which types of awards. And the hope would be that low income, high poverty places who have the fewest resources to repay a loan would receive grants. And so it would be good from an equity standpoint to support a few more systems in that upper quadrant. The bulk of awards in New Jersey are going out as loans to low-income places, which is great news from an equity standpoint. And these places that have lower poverty rates have potentially more resources within the communities to repay the loan, but still really benefit from that low interest rate, that subsidized assistance that comes through the program. And then there's some places in New Jersey that have really high median household incomes and pretty low poverty rates that are still receiving SRFs. It's possible that they're using these funds to support projects in places that need assistance within their community. We don't have specific geocodes on where the projects occur, or that they're really innovative and resilient projects. So our standpoint is not that these systems should not receive SRFs, but there's some questions around places that have really high bond ratings and might be able to self-finance, how providing these awards helps them. States, of course, are trying to balance their portfolio in terms of which systems receive funds and manage get these dollars out the door. And so there is also a benefit from having a diverse portfolio, but these are decisions and trade-offs that the state is making. All right, and then my last substantive side here is on which types of projects are funded, and this is within the Clean Water Program. And I looked at projects that are tagged as green infrastructure or nature-based infrastructure, so that includes habitat restoration, land conservation, silviculture, in addition to green infrastructure. And nationally, about 3% of the amount of the awards on the clean water side are going out to green infrastructure projects. In New Jersey, that's 7%, and there's been a real upward trend in the last couple of years on supporting more green projects. So from a resiliency standpoint, that's a good place to encourage the state and continue to send funds. And so what can we do in terms of tweaking this program to enhance equity and resilience? There's opportunities around the state policy reform to put up a few guardrails in these ways, and also providing more technical assistance to low-income, low-resource places to help them apply and then manage the loan. And one place for the public comment, as I said up top, is to look at the intended use plan. And so with that, here's my information, and thanks very much.
Katie, thank you so much. Very informative, and there'll probably be some questions we'll get into after we get through the rest of the presenters. Next up, Kareem Nadeem, and let me just first preface this by saying and taking the opportunity to say thank you to Kareem and his staff and all the water systems in the state who are essential employees that worked and kept things going through this pandemic. They didn't miss a day, and their services were more critical than ever. So I don't know if anyone said it earlier, but I want to be the one to say it to Kareem as a representative of a water utility, but all the water utilities in the state, both public, private, investor owned, you name it, and not just water, of course, but all the folks that have provided those services to us to keep things moving as a society deserve a real debt of gratitude from us, Jersey Water Works, and the residents of the state. So with that luxury, I was just afforded myself as moderator. I'm going to introduce Kareem and give him the floor, and excited to hear what he has to say. Kareem, you're muted there.
Dan, from the City of Newark Water and Sewer Department and all the other utilities out the state, we thank you for that accolade that you just gave us, because it's really hard on the water utilities. We don't get recognized until something happened, right? A main break or sewer collapse. That's when everybody remember water and sewer. As Katie, thank you for that presentation on the iBank. I think the New Jersey State Revolving Loan Fund, we call the iBank, NJIB, is a great resource for the state. However, the topic of this, when significant funding is available for capital improvement, I think the Garden State, and I'm gonna say New Jersey, the Garden State, Dan, under your administration, under the Christie administration, we planted the seed for lead service replacement by first, the Senator Rice and a bunch of other senators put funding in place to test the schools and then to do lead service replacement back then, and challenge the New Jersey DEP with, allocating that money. Fast forward, the city of Newark has really did a robust program that the pundits would say that is a model for the nation. But some things came out of that I really recognize, and it's funding. When we look at funding, and I said the iBank is great. Funding allows us to put construction projects really in place. Borrowing from the iBank is great, but every utility in the state doesn't have the ability to borrow funds or get grants from the iBank or from the federal government, whether it's WIFIA. We need to make sure that, similar to the ARP funding that went directly to utilities and that went directly to municipalities, county and regular local cities, that same type of funding needs to happen to cities in New Jersey to move projects forward. Everybody doesn't have the bonding capacity to go out and bond, go in front of the local finance board, and then, try to work with the iBank to get funding. We need to provide direct money to some of these disadvantaged communities, whether we earmark it or not, to move projects forward. It's great to say you're going to have principal forgiveness, but you're still telling some of these disadvantaged communities they need to go and bond out capital, right? Go in front of the local finance board, get it approved, then let the iBank know they're ready to move forward with projects, which can be from anywhere from a year to 3 years to getting a shovel in the ground. When we know the immediate impact on getting construction projects done in the water and wastewater system is now. It provides a greater efficiency to those utilities, and it's providing a valuable resource to the city. When we have an emergency, right? We just declared the emergency. We says an emergency, we call a contract up and they're out there working. And immediately we see the results when they fix a water main break, right? That can be an emergency. Immediately we see the results when they come and repair a sewer line. However, that's because right then and there, we need to get it fixed today, right? We get to see the effects of getting things fixed today. And again, the city of Newark is one of the biggest borrowers of the iBank. Gene Shepard, Dave Zimmer, Lee Peterson, Charles Jenkins, that whole staff down there. We're very grateful in the support that they give us to fund projects too. However, we still got to recognize that we say disadvantaged communities, they're disadvantaged for a reason. We need to start funding projects in disadvantaged communities by giving them a check for that project. Earmark the money for that specific project to be completed. It's going to bring efficiencies into those utilities and those communities to let them know that we really care. We can't keep kicking it down the road as we kick lead service replacement down the road. And I say that because, you know, we talk a lot about who's going to grab this funding up. And Katie showed the chart about that funding and who would grab it up. And when you look at that chart, you you look at the disadvantaged communities, there's a lot of them that get missed because they may not understand the iBank process. And we do need to do a little more communication around that. The iBank process is a great tool to use. We need to, make sure we're working with the iBank to advertise how useful they can be to helping you expedite projects if you have the bonding capacity. But for those cities that's at their debt limit, they can't even think about going to the iBank, right? They're going to tell their residents, we need to raise taxes or raise some type of rates so we can fund a project and may get voted down. And the project is still suffering, but the project that's suffering may impact everybody. So I think similar to what we did with the ARP plan, direct funding in the state need to go to some of these disadvantaged communities and these environmental injustice communities to move projects forward. Loans are great. Even when you're getting principal forgiveness, loans are great. But again, I want to make sure the little guy that's not able to go out and take out a bond or get some loaning can be able to complete projects. And if we earmark stuff for projects, we know that we can get them done. We know when you have funding, what we can do. Let's take a back step and look at the city of Newark. We rolled out a 10-year program to replace lead service lines. 10 years, minimum of 10 years. Because we didn't have funding. And we were still working with the iBank to fund this 10-year program. The county was able to come in and bond out $120 million to expedite a lead service replacement program, right, in under 3 years. Thanks to the county executive, Joe D, county freeholders, the Newark Municipal Council, and the Mayor Baraka. But and Senator Booker also had to allow the iBank to move clean water funds over to drinking water funds. So it was a lot of stuff that had to get moved just for us to expedite the program to replace over 22,000 lead service lines that we replaced today. So now the biggest challenge now is green infrastructure, right? With direct funding to some of these utilities, these combined sewer overflow communities, and some of them are highly disadvantaged communities, we can initiate green infrastructure projects, which stimulates the economy with jobs. We can do more combined sewer overflows. We can start doing some of those projects, right, by having direct funding for some of those projects outlined, right? Direct funding. I'm not saying to stimulate the economy. It also brings the workforce on, but we also know that we see the efficiencies when we start getting shovel-ready projects in the ground, right, in the disadvantaged communities or the environmental injustice community. Because right now we know that, no disrespect to the Suezes, the United Waters, the Middlesex Waters, they're going to be ready to apply for this money. The investor-owned utilities, they're going to be ready to go to the iBank on behalf of cities that they represent in conjunction to get funding. But some of those disadvantaged communities may not be ready, or don't have the capacity, right? Or at the debt limit. I say capacity and debt limit to get any of that funding. And a failure, right? A failure is a temporary state where the most valuable lessons are learned. We've learned some valuable lessons during the COVID pandemic, but we've also learned some valuable lessons during Newark's challenges to remove lead service lines. So the Garden State, who's always planting the seed, right, to be the model for everyone else. We have one of the best infrastructure state revolving loan fund programs in the country. Look, we have a city that removed lead service lines at a rapid pace. So we're always planting the seed. We need to continue planting seeds. Now start nourishing them to ripe, right? And start providing funding, planting those seeds and providing funding, direct funding, not a grant, not a loan, to some of these utilities in disadvantaged communities to get their infrastructure in place. And then I don't want to keep going on, but I think that's where we need to go.
Appreciate
Provide
you.
some direct funding.
That's great. And Kareem, I know you didn't intend to exclude anyone, but I just wanted to just say, I know we got a bunch of people on the call, on the horn here. The engineering community is a part of this too.
Yes.
And I know you guys, I'll do a shameless plug for one of them, CDM Smith. I know that the services they provide Newark and Trenton have been really part of the story there. And there's a lot to learn from the engineering community as well, who support and help. That's another part of the big win here. So next up is Nicole.
Dan,
Yeah.
Dan, and my apologies. And I just want to say, when I say direct funding, some of these municipalities, these disadvantaged communities, they don't even have funding to hire consultants like CDM,
Right.
or CDM Smith, or Grand Engineering, or Arcadius, or
Right.
AECOM. They don't have funding to even hire an engineer to help them navigate the state revolving loan fund program.
Right.
All we're here to go through the IBank. This is another reason we need to pivot and start thinking outside the box to help some of these disadvantaged communities and environmental injustice communities get through the door. Not always just having a leg in the door or foot in the door, but get through the door so they can get projects done in their communities.
Right.
Thank you.
So thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And we all know the kind of the rubber meets the road on the block in the community. And Nicole has a career that's developed and active in both volunteer and professional services that gives her a really unique perspective about the community perspective. And when there's a guy, I'm kind of doing this for effect, Kareem. When there's a guy with one of these that shows up on your block, knocking on doors, people ask a lot of questions, right? And Nicole and groups like she works with can be part of the solution from project inception through construction, right? So
Yes.
contractors are not the best communicators. I'll say that for sure. Nicole's going to have a little conversation here about, as a resident, as a green team member, how do we not only get this money to the right place, but make sure communities aware in a transparent and accountable way what's going on their block. So Nicole.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to you. My name, as was mentioned, is Nicole Miller. I am principal consultant of M&M Consulting and co-chair of Newark DIG, doing infrastructure green, along with a few other hats as well. But truthfully, I'm a resident and I'm a parent here in Newark, New Jersey. And I give of my time to advocate for collaborative and regenerative solutions to environmental problems, including fixing our aging water infrastructure. And I want to thank all of my participants, my fellow panelists, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us for this important conversation. The expertise that my fellow panelists bring is evident from the talks that they've given so far. And I'm here really to represent the community voice, right? And to do that, I want to help center the conversation that hopefully we'll be having in the next few minutes and ground that conversation in several key considerations. And so first, we think about safety, right? So we must remember during this conversation the people that we're serving. I think we can all agree that water is an essential part of life, and poorly managed water resources are not just a mild inconvenience. Poorly managed drinking and wastewater can be damaging and deadly. There is no safe level of lead exposure, and the tragic repercussions of lead poisoning last long after the exposure itself. Those repercussions include behavioral and learning challenges, as well as physical harms to young nervous systems, hearing and speech problems, and underdevelopment and growth. These harms also continue to lead to lifelong struggles, especially in communities that are already beset by systemic social, criminal, economic, and environmental justice challenges. Hurricane Ida ravaged communities far from the coast. The realities of wastewater management can no longer be put off as an out of sight, out of mind concern. The funds from state and federal sources can and should be used to address the public health concerns in our drinking and wastewater. These funds need to be moved swiftly into use with respect for who will benefit and how public safety will be improved by these actions. And again, we think about affordability. Now, if water is essential, then access to clean drinking water and protection from harmful wastewater pollutants needs to be achieved in a way that doesn't harm life. We need to give serious consideration to the ramifications of costs 5, 10, or 15 years down the road. The coming funds can be applied in such a way that they reduce the timeline of water improvement projects and give opportunities for municipalities to implement innovative funding solutions. We've discussed some of the solutions, grants. We've discussed the state revolving loans. Other options that communities have with self-financing might be something like a stormwater utility. An option like this can often shift costs away from residents to property owners with large and impervious surfaces. These funds offer an opportunity for New Jersey to reconsider how residents and property owners pay to support the systems that we all rely upon. Then there's also the opportunity for workforce development. A commitment to triple bottom line achievements in investments in water infrastructure means that there should also be a commitment to training and funding local jobs. These funds may be seen by some groups as a clear money grab for those who are already in position to benefit. But it is the job of our elected and appointed officials to make sure that there are opportunities for those who have traditionally been left out of construction and trade unions. With some exceptions, these projects are projected to have 10 to 20-year implementation schedules. That's more than enough time for local training and workforce development. And of course, climate change. The effects of climate change can no longer be said to be 25, 50, or 100 years away. We're having 100-year storms regularly, and therefore our flood risk assessments are undergoing ongoing review. Similarly, the calibrations we use to design our water infrastructure needs to take into account the shifting patterns of rainfall, inland flooding, and the effects of increases in populations through the entire expected lifespan of the infrastructure project. The last thing we want is projects going into the ground that will be made immediately obsolete by the effects of climate change. We also have to consider capacity challenges in our federal, state, and local municipalities. When we think about rising to the challenge of this moment, there are specific concerns with state and local capacity to manage the distribution, design, evaluation, and monitoring of how these funds are used. No conversation on increased spending will be complete without a focus on how our state and municipal offices will be able to handle the increased loads these funds will require to manage. To best prepare for the coming funding and to make sure those funds are handled quickly and professionally, we must ramp up the capacity of our offices. Making sure funding is available to all is more than just a basic consideration of how funds are distributed and allocated. Keeping in mind who is being served and who will benefit, how funds will help New Jersey residents access clean, healthy water and waterways, how funds can help with local hiring, and how we're planning for an uncertain future, climate future, are paramount considerations for this conversation. And I look forward to having it with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Let's run through a couple questions here. Maybe start with a question for Kareem could hit on. I think Kareem used the word shovel-ready projects. And that's a term that was used last as a term of art probably 10 years ago with the last big kind of national recovery package, and then with Hurricane Sandy, and then before that with other federal funding packages to recover from either economic or natural disasters. I guess what do you mean by shovel ready, and how do you think municipalities and utilities can get to work on getting projects ready for the funding that's coming? You're muted there, Rod.
let me just clarify my definition of shovel-ready projects from everybody else. My definition of shovel-ready projects for those disadvantaged and environmental injustice communities are those projects that's been sitting on the shelves for the last 3 or 4 decades that we know need to be done, right? But the communities either don't have the money to get the projects done or the money to bring a consultant on, right, to assist them in getting any type of funding to start eliminating some or abating some of those projects. We all know shovel ready mean we want to do a groundbreaking and put a shovel in it and have construction companies start working. In some of these communities, it's projects that's like that, and it's always going to be projects like that that's ready to go. We shouldn't avoid them, but we also want to make sure that the disadvantaged and the environmental injustice communities get help with this round of funding that they may have missed out on the money going back to 2008, the American Infrastructure Investment Act, right? That they missed out on because they just wasn't ready. It was shovel ready. They wasn't ready. They didn't have a consultant. They didn't have the project in the pipeline. They knew they needed it done. A lot of us know we need it done. So that's my definition of shovel ready.
Yeah, there's the iBank's data is very transparent, and anyone can tell and look at their data. And I've looked at it recently, and there's over $2.2 billion of projects that are in environmental review. And on the drinking water side, there's projects that are queued up and ready because in the past couple of years they became short on funds. So it's not that the projects didn't rank high; it's just they didn't rank high enough. So the iBank does have projects that are kind of ready to roll, like you said, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity there for sure. Anyone else want to grab the question, or do we want to move on? All right. Hey, Chris, I know there's a couple questions teed up. I got more questions here, but I know we all went a little bit long, and I want to make sure that the group has an opportunity to answer questions that come from the crowd.
Sure, that's great. Well, thanks everybody. Great discussion, and there's some great questions. The first one comes partly from Nicole, who asks, why are only 10% of water systems using the drinking water SRF, and what's holding them back from using that money? So maybe this one starts with Katie.
Pleasure. And such an essential question, I think, for this whole conversation. And Gary alluded to this in the question too about do systems know about the SRFs? We did a survey and found that most systems do know about SRFs. Although when you talk to some, especially those that have very few staff members or volunteer boards or something, there just might not be the awareness of the funding program. And then the larger barrier is what it takes to apply for these SRFs. So that it's this lengthy, complex process. It requires outlining what the project will be and making sure that the environmental review clears and just jumping over those hurdles, which are required from Congress with federal cost cutters, takes a long time to just make it through that. Then when you receive the awards, you have to implement them in such a way that also complies with federal regulations. And so there's a awareness component, there's a capacity component, and then it's worth saying, as we know, the vast majority of water infrastructure is funded with revenue, and it's bonded through the muni bond market. So when muni bonds are so low, there are thousands of systems that are able to receive funds outside of the SRF system, which is why we're so appropriately today focused on those that really do benefit from these subsidized funds.
Hey, Chris, could I just say that a lot of our water system operators remember the time from the 60s and 70s when everything was grants, the capital grant program, and there are some strengths and weaknesses of that approach. It evolved into the SRF loan program. I think New Jersey had for a while suffered from having a reputation of our SRF program of being overly complicated and not quick enough and not as efficient as it could be. And I think there's a lot of people to credit for the evolution of the program, where it stands now, and folks that have used the program, I think, are better testimonials than I can provide. That it's in a much better place than if the system applied 20 years ago and it was really hard. That reputation is hard to kind of shake. And the engineering community and the borrower community has been really trying to expand the knowledge that a lot more is done online now. My first year as a commissioner of DEP, they walked me into a room, and it was a whole room of boxes of paper. And the idea of the H2 loan system, which was basically a digital database for data submission, was hatched way before I got there. And folks and the DEP and the iBank deserve credit for implementing that. But there's no more room anymore of boxes of paper. It's a lot quicker and a lot smarter program these days than it was 10 years ago. So I think that's the gospel, and we're just trying to kind of share the gospel on where we're at today.
Hey, Chris, if I can, and the iBank, Chris, the iBank is it has really evolved. Newark is one of the municipalities that use the iBank yearly, daily. I'm just saying we need to move on and expand the horizons. There's people like Dan and Katie said, right, that don't go through the iBank because they think it's a difficult process. However, we need to start thinking about probably having a pool of engineering firms that the iBank can use to help those communities usher in a project or two, right? To see how easy it is, right? That would just help them know, because a lot of people think, oh, the bureaucratic red tape that I have to go to apply for $800,000 project. We just need some support. I think, maybe funding some of those engineering firms to help some of these communities, disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged, know what the iBank can provide to them.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm going to build on that because Gary Brune asked about this as well. Getting through the application process, you can really justify it financially if your project's $1 million or bigger, but when it's smaller, it's a little harder to, or if you haven't gone through it at least once. So, Kareem, so what will it take for states? How can states increase the ability for these smaller, more disadvantaged communities that don't have that experience, but now need to, with the availability of these federal funds, there's a real opportunity for them if they're going to access those funds, as Andy Cricken says, how can we give them the shovel to get at the treasure chest? So, Kareem, you've mentioned, some pro bono free engineering consultants that could help them get through it once. Perhaps there's also some planning and design grants that would give them the upfront money to do that work. Just want to throw that out to the rest of the panelists to hear your thoughts.
Well, Chris, I think that, I'm not going to say pro bono. I'm thinking the iBank can have a pool of engineers that would assist, that they would pay for them to, because pay for those utilities or municipalities to start putting in applications and guiding them through the process. That's different. So that means this engineer is going to design, develop, and guide you through the process with the iBank to put your application in. But on the other end, we still need to make sure some type of direct funding can help those people that's at the debt limit that cannot use the iBank. Mm-hmm. Right? We want to use the iBank, right? Which will help you in the long run, reduce your debt with the principal forgiveness and the grants. But right now, I need to get a couple of projects done, and I need the money to get them done. I don't have the debt capacity to use the iBank. But if the iBank was to, in the future, think about, hey, here's a pool of engineers. We know you got 10 projects in our database, like Dan said, right? These two, we're going to provide an engineer to start your project of funding it through the iBank.
Great. Katie, any examples from other places
Sure.
in the country?
Yeah. So, first in New Jersey, I know Gary's working on the ideas of assistance corps. There are circuit riders, and RCAP does a great job with some smaller utilities, Rural Water Association. So there are already many intermediaries that are working to help utilities navigate this process. EPIC's working on setting up a similar navigator program. They've just announced different projects along these lines. So I think we're all gearing up to try to get more grease in the skids in ways to just help utilities patch together the pots of money and expertise to complete a full application cycle. So the last thing I'll say, that our SRFs can fund designs and development projects with awards before construction grants and awards. And that's a really useful tool. Between that and the set-asides that are possible for technical assistance, the state can do a lot to kind of prop up these wraparound services to prepare systems to then have shovel-ready projects.
Great, thank you. Oh, Dan, you're on mute.
Just want to add that if the state of New Jersey really is serious about this, and I know they are, we're also going to have to think about complementing their staff with assistance. Not just the water program, but the SADC approvals, the SHPO, the Historic Preservation Office approvals. We need to have a strong and robust staff, but we're not going to gear up overnight in terms of civil service and FTEs, right? So the DEP needs our support, and we need to not forget to advocate for them as well. And the iBank needs our support, and we can't forget to advocate for them as well.
Great. Okay, awesome. I've got another question from a different angle from Rebecca Morley. She's asking, how can residents of divested communities have a voice in where and how federal funding flows for water projects? And this was kind of alluded to by Colette, the keynote speaker, as well.
Well, I'll just sort of take a stab at that one. It really has to be a collaboration. So the voices of the community, we ultimately, the residents, taxpayers are the funders of so many of these projects. And so that respect needs to be paid to the community to really ask them what their opinions are with regard to specific projects, especially those projects that will affect them. And then also to keep them informed about the projects throughout the design and implementation phases. There are inevitable disruptions that happen. I'm sure Director Adim can account during this very fast-paced lead service line replacement. There were street closures. There were streets that had to be torn up. Homes, there was knocking on doors to get access to property. It was a massive push to get out, but there was, I think, very little pushback from the community because they were very much aware of the problem, the need for a solution, and the fact that this was being done at a fast pace as a public health concern. And so when we take into consideration the public as a partner and really bring them up to speed on the need for these projects, the cost of inaction, ultimately what the cost will be to them on an individual basis, and what the potential disruptions will be, then you'll find, I think, a much more easy flow of easy flowing relationship with the public, as opposed to a sort of like, I just dropped a pin or I showed up one day and tore up the street. And the community doesn't know what's happening. So that's my initial take on it. I'm sure I could go on more, but I'll let someone else respond to it.
Yep, I'll chime in. And to your point, Nicole, and to Kareem's credit, right, the city of Newark did an incredible job of canvassing neighborhoods and communicating with their residents about what they were doing and why. And I think that's sometimes a challenge for some communities, but Newark, hit the ground running and really had a great sort of program put together to really communicate what they were doing and when they were doing it and why and where. The question being, how do you get residents to have more of a say in where these federal funds are going? It's a tall ask to get your run-of-the-mill resident to understand and advocate for a small tweak in the state's intended use plan, right, for where SRF, drinking water SRF funds are going. So, it's just the old sort of organize and educate and communicate. From our perspective, from the legislative perspective, and when we're writing and appropriating the funding, I love getting this question, right? We tried to be as accessible and reachable as possible, and I think most congressional offices would say the same. But you do have access to your local elected officials, and they have access to congressional offices, and we should be, and we are collectively, as a caucus, but we should be raising voices to really talk about, it's not just, to Kareem's point, it's not just throwing large numbers of dollars out there. it's making sure that we're writing into statute and we're putting into these laws, X amount needs to go here and X amount needs to be available directly to communities. We talked about COVID relief a little bit, and Kareem mentioned the direct municipal funding from the COVID relief. That was through a HUD program, which existed, formula funding, right? So when we plus up a lot of these programs, they're through existing programs. It's a tall sort of, it's a challenge to get the change from formula funding that goes to state, because the perception is the states are a little bit closer to home and they're going to send that money out a lot easier. It's a little bit more complicated with the SRF and the intended use plan, and that's not necessarily something your average resident understands. So continuing to advocate, I think, pushing and saying, at the 1,000-foot view, we have to make sure that when we're appropriating these federal funds, these guardrails are in place, that it's going to the communities that need it. And that's something we've tried to do, but we need to do a lot more of it.
Yeah. Let's take it to the next level. So, because you're right, Zach, getting an advocate like me to comment on the IUP is a challenge. It's not very obvious. Well, anyway, I should step up and do it, but let's talk about residents who aren't in this business and getting paid to work on it. So what role can the state of New Jersey play? Like, it has access to American Rescue Plan funds. It can allocate some of those for water infrastructure. And when it does that, it has the opportunity to to attach requirements, say, for community engagement. What are the right intermediaries? And Kareem, you've done a great job, and I think you relied on some community partners. How do we bridge the gap between residents and businesses who are paying for these services and should have input into new projects, and the ultimate government decision makers?
So Zach, you want to go first or me? Oh, it's for me? Okay. So Chris, I did talk about, failures, right? And lessons learned. We've already learned lessons of how, partner with community groups to make sure that you're on page for the same message and not being afraid. They don't have to control the outcome, but you want to bring them to be a part of the outcome. We always talk about that, but we never really inviting them in. Inviting them in and understanding that we have one goal in place. The goal is to remove lead service lines. We want to get lead service lines out and take their input to see how can they assist us in educating people, educating our residents why we need to remove lead service lines. Educating our residents why it's important to sign up. Educating our residents at community meetings that we invite residents, let their voices be heard. We also invite the contractors and those community groups, that really have the pulse of the neighborhoods that they work in every day, right? We shouldn't be afraid to invite them. Is it going to be some residents that don't agree? Yes, but we still should not be afraid to hear them out. Something in there could be valuable to us that we may need to use in the future. It's all a part of lessons learned. And when I say, how can they have say on the federal level? They have a say when we see the news coming to a disadvantaged community and that we know has CSO, combined sewer overflows, and then Ida come and we see the city under 4 feet of water. They got the federal government. They got all the elected officials. They got the federal government. The media has let everybody know it's an issue over there. The state, federal, and local. When we're running around with FEMA and the governor's office and Homeland Security, we already know what needs to be done, right? We look at a city like Raritan, right, and it got flooded out. We know what needs to be done. We got everybody's attention. The community is being heard. The president even came. Now we need to make sure that funding comes into these communities and stuff actually gets done, not through the bottleneck of paperwork. One thing about the lead service line program, I always tell the story, and I'm gonna say it again. When we think about the government doing a project, we look at a highway project that's been going on for 40 years. They've been working on a turnpike since I remember riding down there in 75, right? They was widening it, shortening it, putting the new ramp up. If you go on the turnpike today, it's somewhere on the turnpike that they're doing some type of construction project that bottlenecks and get delayed. And people have the notion that if the government going to do it, it's going to be done in 50 years. No, It can be done quicker, faster, more efficient, and effectively with funding, with the proper funding mechanism. And the community loves that. And you make some of the community be a part of that by bringing them on with jobs. You bring them on and put them right in. That's great for you.
Can I also just respond to that, seconding Kareem's point? There's, we're both Kareem and I are here in Newark, West Ward, and so we're 250,000 people that we're talking about trying to reach, right? But there are much smaller communities of 5, 10, 50,000 people. But the mechanisms remain. There are always community groups. There are environmental commissions. There are parent groups, there are block associations, there are groups that are in touch with the community, there are media outlets, there are ways in which people can really be brought together around these issues. And the best way to do that is to talk to the people who are on the ground in those communities. They know how to get in touch with people. Here in Newark, I know a fair amount of people in my West Ward, but I go to Kim Gaddy when I need to go to the South Ward, and I go over to La Casa when I need to go to the North Ward, and I go to ICC when I need to go in the East Ward, because they know their community, they outreach to them, they work with them diligently. And so when they ask for those communities to be present at a conversation, those communities trust their word. And so then they engage with them, and the municipality engages with them, informs them, and is honest with them, then that creates a trust triangle there between the communities, the municipalities, and the community groups.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to move on to another question, but let's think about what role Jersey Waterworks could play in helping spread that model in New Jersey. Okay. This question has to do with the Build It Back Better bill, or whatever it's called, Zach. The next one that's being worked on in Congress. Two questions. One is from Andrew Tabus: what strategies could be used to get all 50 senators to agree on the bill? And second are could you share some examples of the kinds of changes that are being considered?
So that is the $1.7 trillion question, how to get all 50 senators to agree. To get 100 senators to agree, you maybe start by not referring to sort of climate or social change, because not all of them think climate change exists or is caused by is man-made. But I sort of say it with a smirk, but the truth is ultimately this is the nature of the Senate, where unfortunately in a 50-50 sort of divided chamber, one senator wields, I hate to say wields a lot of power, but certainly wields a lot of ability to keep anything from happening. And so to the question on sort of what changes are happening, it could be tweaks here and there on many different aspects of it. Like I said, I don't know that there's an expectation that the water numbers I read out that were passed in the House will change, but ultimately, you have chairmen and ranking members and senators sort of negotiating on the sections of the bill that pertain to their jurisdiction. And again, because of this sort of reconciliation process, because it has to be passed through that process, the budget, how it's worded and what it looks like and what can be included and how is very different than a typically passed or, just voting on the House version. So, and that's all to sort of avoid the filibuster. And so I wish I had an answer to that question. I mean, ultimately, it's sitting down and working things out, and trying to have really the caucus that's in control of the Senate has a very sort of wide range of ideology from moderate to much more progressive, and so you just hope that ultimately the will to get something done is enough to push it across the finish line. And I think when we're talking about things like this, in addition to a lot of other critically important aspects of the Build Back Better plan, there's just so many things in there that are too important to let pass by. And so I think that ultimately is what's pushed us across the line with a lot of COVID relief, and maybe optimistic that the need to get something done is what ultimately brings 50 senators to to the table.
Good luck.
Thanks, Zach. So we've got more questions that we have time to ask here. And we're going to conclude with some kind of takeaways and action steps. So Jersey Waterworks is not a lobby group. It's a lot about education and collaboration. Just speaking out loud, I know our backbone staff at Jersey Waterworks is listening, and there are times where these ideas can then kind of bubble up and become action items and priorities for our committees to begin working on. And from Katie's presentation, I gleaned we can do better with the number of systems that are capitalized in the infrastructure bank. Although we're doing better than the national average, we should strive to do better, understand the nuances there. With Nicole, I think some of the takeaways is kind of like community engagement early and often, all the way through the process, and relying on those community assets that already exist to leverage those, not in a selfish way, but in a way that helps move these projects forward. Is some of the, I think we're already working on through Jersey Waterworks a lot of education and campaign and community development. It's working well in some towns, and others towns it's not as good as it could be. So what are the resources and assets that Jersey Waterworks can produce to help those towns that can learn from those towns do better is something that Jersey Waterworks could and should focus on. With Director Adim, I think the Newark success, I for one, when I heard the schedule there, I kind of smirked a little bit, and I think probably and they did it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Newark success, I'm not sure you can boil it down to a couple of bullet points, but I think if our large cities can do it, our medium-sized cities can do it, our suburbs can do it, and our rural communities can do it. So we maybe take an opportunity to kind of talk about that. I'm sure he's got a lot of media interest. He's already had a lot of media interest and interviews, and everyone wants to know what's the secret to the success. And I don't know that there is a big secret. I think it's just, like he said, funding, a great team, and really just having to focus on getting it done. And a really good plan with community engagement. I think, I think there were some early fits and starts, but when they really hit their stride, man, it really worked. With Zach, I think we just wanted to say, we want to, with the tranches of funding available now, I think as we wait for the Build Back Better, we should track that Jersey Waterworks and see what opportunities there are to capitalize on that funding. But there's a lot that's been offered to us from the federal government to New Jersey, long overdue. And I think we'd be smart to really focus on getting that money to work, as opposed to asking for more and just waiting for that kind of the pop fly in the center field to kind of get bigger. So I think we really appreciated the information you shared. I think we got to find a way to bundle that into a message to the general membership for those that weren't able to contribute to today or participate today. I think there's a lot of great information there that we got to find a way to package together and send out broadly for those that were not able to join this panel today. So those are some of the takeaways. And did I miss anything big, folks? And please, anyone who is on the call here, or any of the panelists wants to share some takeaways that I may have missed a little bit, to Lauren, send them to Lauren and Belsky, and she'll make sure that they get heard. A little bit of a pitch here. Although Jersey Waterworks doesn't lobby, there's organizations like mine that are recommending to the state to use its available American Rescue Plan Act funding to support some more generational investment in modernizing our water infrastructure. Asked the team to pop into the chat a link that has a sign-on letter, not on behalf of Jersey Waterworks, but as a member of Jersey Waterworks, and individually as somebody who's a lobbyist essentially for UTCA. I wanted to share this information with you, and perhaps you individually as an organization would consider signing on with your own name or your own organization to add to the over, I think, 30 members and signatures that we have already to push the state of New Jersey to use the money that it has in the bank lawfully to modernize our water infrastructure. I will note that there's going to be a scavenger hunt game question on Water Check popping up. And also, while that's popping up, to note that this is just day one of the conference. Day two, there's one session, but it's an important one. which is tomorrow, Thursday, December 9th. There's a workshop at 6 p.m. titled Seizing the Moment, the Role of Community and Water Stewards. This session is designed for the community who may want to be involved in water conversations, but do not work in the sector, and for people who work in the sector and want to learn more about how to connect to the community. I think this is a real evolution of Jersey Water Works. I don't think we would have had a panel like this a couple of years ago. Guys like me recognize that I'm a paid day-to-day guy working for an interest that blends into Jersey Water Works, but we've agreed at Jersey Water Works that we need to do better, and we are doing better with engaging the community and kind of meeting the community on their terms, and scheduled for nighttime, easily accessible, and maybe you chime in and listen, and I'll be doing the same. Consider learning more about Jersey Water Works and getting more involved. The website, jerseywaterworks.org, is live and available. And I don't think I missed anything because the Backbone staff does such a great job preparing us. But if I did, I welcome Chris or Paula or Lauren or anyone else to chime in before we conclude here, perhaps a couple minutes early. But I think we had a really productive session. I want to thank you all for joining. So anything else for the good of the order? I wish you all the best. Be well and stay well. And I hope you all, if we don't run into each other beforehand, I hope you all have a great holiday stretch coming up.
Thanks, everyone. What a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Don't forget the scavenger hunt.
Oh, yes. And sign on to the letter.